Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Menachot daf Lamed Aleph. We are going to begin on the very bottom of Lamed Amud Beis, the last line. So we ended up saying that Kol Makom Sheshan Rav Shimon Shazuri Halacha Kamaisi. Anytime that we learn Rav Shimon, the halacha is like him. And we went through numerous situations where we find the psak of Rav Shimon Shazuri, and then finally we say that it's referring these two things in which we will say, even though there's people that are arguing that the halacha is specifically like him. Elo Rav Papa Ashida, one has to do with a carriage. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Omer, it's a yayin on wine. So Rav Papa Omer Ashida. What exactly is this referring to? So this is in Masechtas Kalim. Ditnan, we learned over there that the shida is a wooden wagon or a box, and since it's more than 40 saw, anything that's more than 40 saw, it does not have the capacity to become tameh. Because in order to become tameh, it has to be something which is metali moli v'reika, that can be transported or moved full or empty. And something which is more than 40 saw is the measurement that we say it's too big, so it doesn't take upon itself like a kli, and therefore because of that it's not mekabel tuma. So now over there was a discussion, and in a few moments we'll get to Rav Shimon Shazuri. What exactly how do we measure this shida? Again, this wooden wagon or box. We're going to translate it as a wagon. So Meishami Oimrim Nimdenes Mibifnim. What you have to do is you measure only that which is inside. As Rashi says, as we just mentioned, V'shida Tevo Migdol Shemachzika Mem Sa Bolach Shehin Kurayim Biyavesh. When it comes to 40 saw for a liquid, which is a core by Yavesh, because there's surface tension, that it can go a little bit higher. Yotz Materis Kli. It's no longer considered a Kli in Mekabel and Toma. So again, how do we measure it? So according to Shitas Beis Shammai, it's inside. It says Rashi, Royin ilu hoyacholum imifnim. If let's say you had this opening in the inside, hoyamashlim mikarayim. Okay, Beis Hillel oimer mibachutz, that you can even use the outside of the wagon in part of your calculation. Umaydim elu ve'elu, but they agree she'en oive haraglayim, that the feet, the width of the legs, which is more than the boards, the oive haliv zavzin, and the lip or the rim at the very top, which is closed from the inside, that nimdad, that those things are not measured. She'ain nimdad, they're not measured. Okay, so they're not included in the calculation. Rabbi Yossi oimer moedim she'oive haraglayim ve'oive halevazvazin nimdad. Actually, he says no. They do agree, but they actually agree that these things are counted in the calculation. Ubenehem a nimdad, but what is between them, says Rashi, oisui avir, the airspace shebein haraglayim mitachas in nimdad. So the we don't measure at all the airspace in between. Rav Shimon Shazuri Omer, he says it actually depends. If the feet of it are high a tefach, then we don't measure anything which is in between, because a tefach is a makam chashuv. But if it's less than a tefach, beinehem, then nimdad. So in that case, Rav Shimon Shazuri holds that we will measure the airspace in between, provided it's less than a tefach, which is not anymore a makam chashuv. Now on this, Rav Nachman Yitzchak Omer, fine. So on that is where the halacha is like him. Okay, so question 4, right, which is Be'elu divrei Rav Shimon Shazuri psak Rav Chanan halacha kamaisu. So this is what it says. Rav Papa Omer in shida, the Omer is wagon. What's the din regarding this wagon? The Omer Rav Shimon Shazuri shehim ein ragle gavais tefach. Then avir shebeneim, the airspace in between them, is included to equal the 40 saw. Okay, that's answer number 1. And then we have the next way that we hold like him. Rav Nachman Yitzchak a yayin when it comes to the dinim of wine. So what is that? Dinan. Rav Meir Omer shemen techil oilam. So, as Rashi says, bein shenitma ba'avatoma. Let's say you have an avatoma, and it comes in contact with a liquid. O barishain, o b'sheni, doesn't make any difference. Even now, of course, if an avatoma touches the shemen, makes sense that it should become a rishon. But what if a rishon touches it, or a sheni touches it, right? So the chiddush is that it actually becomes a rishon, even though you would think it should be demoted. That's not the case when it comes to these liquids. The kaimelon kol hapaisel as a truma, anything which can passel truma, which means a sheni could passel truma, which could become a shlishi, but then it stops there. Metamin mashke mulis techila, the shemen mashke. Shemen is considered to be a liquid, and therefore, because of that, if anything touches that shemen, even if it's a sheni, it will elevate it to the status of tumas to a rishon tumah. That's the din. Okay, the Gemara in Pesachim discusses that toward the end of the first parak, which is a little bit difficult. Also, honey would have the same din. It will become a rishon tumah. And here's Rav Shimon Shizuri Omer af hayayin. He says also wine. The chiddush is by wine. So what's wrong with wine? Why would that's a mashke? Why would it not be included in this din? So yayin lo. Amor of Shimon Shizuri Omer yayin only. The point that he's saying, and Rashi says v'loy shemen of davash. According to Rav Shimon Shizuri, he will hold only wine has the status of a liquid, but not shemen and not honey. On that is where the halacha is like him. So look, question 4. So that din is only by wine, but not by shemen and not by dvash. So that is the special din when it comes to that. Okay. Fine. So Tanya, Rav Shimon Shizuri. Rav Shimon Shizuri says the following story: Pamachas nisarevli tevel b'chulin. One time we had a problem because obviously if you have tevel, so you could separate the truma and meiser, but tevel was mixed up with chulin, and Rashi points out it's not regular tevel; it was tevel demai, b'chulin. So it was questionable. Whether the whole notion of demai is that when you get demai from an Amaretz, you don't know, did they separate meiser, did they not separate meiser, and therefore it's like this quasi question in the chulin. So Rashi says you can't separate them because of the chulin that's mixed into it. Even though it says Rashi, demai is really not a din deraisa, but meiser. Afil hachi hoyel mechayim and rabbanon. Since there is a chiyim and rabbanon to separate trumas and meisos from demai, kavli min chulin hapoter al tevel chiyuv. So again, you're separating from one thing which has even a chiyuv and rabbanon to which is tevel demai, to chulin which has already been separated. So the question is, what do you do in that case? So that's the question that was presented to Rav Shimon Shizuri. So I approached the Reb Tarfon of Yarmeli, and he said, "Kach lech kach lecha min hashuk." Go and take from the shuk demai from an Amaretz, which is also a ptur midaraisa, va'aser olav, and take meiser on it. So this is an interesting thing. Now, why would he say that you should get more demai from the shuk? Ksaber diraisa beruba bottle, because he holds midiraisa we go basar roiv, and it's bottle roiv amaretz ma'asrin, and we know that this is actually a case where it's assumed that this person actually did take off trumas and meisers. because most Amaratzim do take off Meiser. V'avalei kitarim min a patur el patur. So therefore, it's ki'ilu like you're taking a patur from a patur. That's how we understand it. Says Rashi. Okay, that's his logic. So therefore, you can technically, it's just a donation if you want to give Trumas and Meisers again from Chulin. It may not have the halachic status entirely of Trumas and Meisers as far as Dini Tuma of a Kohen, but you can certainly separate. Now you could eat the rest of the produce. So that's what was advised. So why from an Amaretz? Why doesn't he say go to an Akum, who's also there? He's potter midaraisa and Trumas and Meisers. Actually, it's not true. If you would purchase from who purchased land in Eretz Yisrael from a Yid, the problem is that is actually a chiyuv to separate, and therefore one is a deraisa and one's a derabana. So therefore you can't do that. So therefore, instead of from an akum, in which is actually a chiyuv deraisa, because it was not removed the kedusha, if you will, therefore there's still a chiyuv to take it off. So that wouldn't have accomplished anything. You should take from an chacham because he held maybe it's the opposite svar. That when you have an akum that purchases the land, the reality is there's no longer chiyuv meiser on those produce because it doesn't belong to a yid anymore. And therefore it's completely potter. So so why don't you go to the Amaretz? Because in that situation, it's not like a really much of a suffix, a small suffix. There is actually a very good chance that they did not take off Trumas and Meisers. And Rashi says, El Masafkinan Bahu, Mechsal Mechsa. It's like a 50-50 over here. It's not like a Roiv. Hilkach Iklo Meimar, it's possible, says Rashi, you could say, HaMa'uriv Nis Aser, that which is mixed up is Meiser, V'zelo Misaser, and this other one is not Meiser. Inami Ivcha, or it could be the other way around, Kach Shemaiti. Okay, Ayin Rashi, but it really, the whole issue is that if Rav Amaretz Masrin, so then what it really means is that this Akum is, this Am Haaretz rather, probably did not take off Trumas and Meisers. So in that situation, that doesn't really help the situation of the Mai, which is, we have this, some element of a Chiyuv here, and then over there, more of a Patur, okay, so, or more of a Chiyuv, I should say. Shalach Rab Yemar Bar Shalmi Rab Papa Hadiyam Rabin Bar Chinna Imer Ulam Rab Chanina Halach Rab Shimon Shizuri Halach is like him. V'lo'oid El Kol Makom Shishana Rab Shimon Shizuri Halach HaMaisel Halach is always like him. Af Benis Arev Le Teva B'Chulin. Is it also in this case that we just said before, where the Tevel and the Chulin got mixed up? Of should you purchase from the Shuk from an Amaretz, or should you purchase from an Akum? Yeah, that's true. It's the same halachas like him too. So Rav Ashi, Amrli Mar Zutra, Kashi Bar Chanina Masura. So Pshita. So he said it seems like pretty obvious as we continue on Amud Beis. Mikaimer b'Mishnah Seinu. It doesn't say only in our Mishnah, right? Which is mashma only a Mishnah, not a Brisa. Kol makom sheshana kaimer. Right, it's mashma anytime. So anytime you hear his sock or anything that he says, the halach is going to be like him. So it's davar pashut that, of course, we would hold like him in that situation as well. Okay, all right. So now we're going to go back to the dinim of Sefer Torah. Let's look at question TA. Let's look at question TA 10. So the question is like this. So how should you separate Trumas and Meisers? So he said there's two opinions. Either that you should get from the Shuk, right? Either Kach Locha Min HaShuk V'Asolov, right? Which is Am Haaretz, or maybe Kachacha Min Ha'avi Kachavim. So those are the two options. And then he says, Umadua Liyasasim et Tevel Gomer. Why don't you just separate it from Tevel itself? Okay. Doesn't really ask you to go too deeply into this. It says, Omen Shuk, the Havli Damai, right? If you get from the Shuk is Damai, or from an Akum, the Ish Kinyan La'akum. Umetevel Gomer Lo, the Minatayra Chad Betrei Bottle, the Havli Minachiv Al Patur. So you can't take off from Tevel, something which is completely Mechuyev, the Havli Chad Betrei Bottle, the Havli Minachiv Al Patur. So again, that's the issue, and Rashi says this over here. Let's just get these words of the Rashi. So this arguably tevel demai b'chulin v'loyachal hafresh menu. You can't be mafresh. Mibnei chulin hamu'uravin boy. V'afalav de demai u'machayiv midaraisa. Afil hachi hom machayiv midarabanan havil min chulin hapatur al tevel hachiv. So that's what we're looking for there. That's TA 10. Okay. And question TB 13 is probably identical. Let's just hope I got it right. I'll read how I wrote it in a second on my actual test. I'll just mark this down. So, it's what I wrote. O min akum, o min ashuk. V'lo metevel gomer hoyel min atayra in chayiv b'maiserak min rabbanan v'havi patur al chayiv. Min chayiv. Okay, I think I got the basic idea behind that. All right, let's move on. Hopefully they marked that correct. All right. Hilchos Sefer Torah. Oimurav z'iri yomurav chanano oimurav kareya. If a person has a tear in the Sefer Torah, that's haba mishnei shitin yitfor. So let's say it goes up 2 lines, right? So then you could sew it up. It's okay, even though if it went through the amount of the parchment of 2 lines. So you can sew it up. But if it's already 3, then I'll yid for you. That's too much. You can't sew it up. You gotta get a new urea, etc. Somewhere le Rabba zuti Rabashi hachiyam Rabbi Yirmiyah medefni mishmei Rabba. That's what he said. Hadi amrina mishal al yiftor. When did we say that once it's 3, don't sew it up? Well, amrun ella ba'atiktah. That's only if we're dealing with a cloth which is older quality. Aval chadtata leislanba. However, if it's a new one which is not treated, then it's okay. The idea is that if it's old, it'll be much more discernible that sewing, and it won't look nice. However, if it's new, it's not going to be as discernible. V'lo tikta mamish doesn't mean that's really old. V'lo chadtata mamish doesn't mean like how many years, what's new, what's old, what's an old Sefer Torah? Is it 50 years, 2 years? That's not what it means. Ella hadalo afitsan hadi afitsan. One is if it was treated with afitsan, which I believe is gallnut juice, that was what they used to put on the Sefer Torah. So on the back, it was a treatable thing. So if it was afitz, says Rashi, havi shachor katika. So the dark part looks old. Afitzan matukan haklaf, and then the golnut fixes up the cloth, and that's basically what it does. So that is the distinction. Let's look at question 5a. Gillian Sefer Torah shenikra be'ez oifen amrinan de'ein litfar el yisalik es hayirah. So when do we say we don't rip? We don't fix it. So if the rip is 3 lines, and the cloth yashan, it's either an old cloth or de'afitz, or it has gallnut, which sounds like that's really the same thing. It sounds like it's really just qualifying what it means. And ein taisis mashma sefer Torah kosher b'lul afitzan. That's possible even if you didn't have this treatment on the cloth, it's still good. Ein taisis. Okay, fine. Bahani mili begidin, that we use sinew to sew it up. That's what is used. Aval begardin lo, but regular threads that we will not use to sew. Okay, so boy Rabbi Yehuda bar Abba ben daf ladaf. Let's say it's not on the words itself, but it's literally between the columns, right? So does that change it? So or ben shita l'shita, my, right? Teku. So again, the question is, do we have the same din? Is it still three columns, 3 lines rather, or maybe it could be more because it doesn't actually go through the words themselves. Rav Ziri, Rav Chananel, Rav. Now we go to the din of a mezuzah. When it comes to a mezuzah, shenichtav shtaim kshera. Even if all you did was write 2 words on each line, which means the columns are very, very narrow, right? You just wrote 2 words, next line 2 words, next line 2 words. That's kosher. That actually is okay when it comes to a Sefer Torah. Again, when it comes to when it comes to a mezuzah, when it comes to a Sefer Torah, it should preferably be l'mishpachei sechem gimel pamim, as we saw in yesterday's daf. So that's kosher. Iboilhu shtayim v'shalosh v'achas mahu. What is the din if it's 3, 2, and 1? Right. So in other words, you start with 3, then you go to 2, then you go to 1. Right. So it's like almost like almost like you're going bowling, right? It's 3, then 2, then 1 toward the bottom, 1 word on the line. So Rav Nachman Yitzchak kol shekain shiasa kshera. Yeah, that's definitely fine. So they say, what do you mean? Asa kishira, if you make it kishira, kamota, Rashi says, shekasav hashira, you write like writing a song, kishar hatevos ariach al gabi ariach, brick on top of brick, which is kind of like the way the Megillah in the Megillah Esther, the names of the Haman are written. Oshira kemoisa, or it's opposite it, which means, as Rashi says, ariach al gabi. So al shira kemoisa is shikasav hashira kishar hatevos, like the rest of the words, ariach al gabi ariach, or oshira kamos psula. So apparently that means 3, 2, 1. So no ki tanyahi b'sefer Torah. So in other words, it's telling us that there's certain times you're not allowed to do it. Why Sefer Torah are more strict. But by mezuzah we're not as much. It were nam yom Rabbi B'Marchana Rav Yochanan. Yermel some say it was Rav Ada Rav Acha B'Marchana Rav Yochanan mezuzah shiasa shtaim v'shalosh v'achas kshera. If you have a mezuzah in which you wrote 2, then 3, then 1, so that is kosher. So in other words, even if you have different amount of words in each line, it's okay, but you cannot make it like a tent. What does that mean? Kizeh. Rashi says, kizeh, k'oil, like a tent, rachav milamata, it's wide at the bottom, v'katzar milamala, and it's gets narrow. So if you have, again, it's like wide, like a pyramid, right? You write 1 word and then 2 and 3. That we do not allow, which is achashtayim shalosh. Achashtayim shalosh is not allowed. Okay. Ubavad shlo yasenu kekuba. Ubavad shlo yasenu kezanav, and also should not look like a tail. Rashi says, what is a tail? Shalosh shtayim v'achas kazeh. Okay, 3, 2, and 1. So in other words, you can't do 1, 2, and 3, and 3, 2, and 1. Rav Chisda, fine. So apparently that is referring to mezuzah, right? So we see, even when it comes to mezuzah, it's not supposed to be done that way. All right. Fine. Ubavad shel yasenu kekuba, ubavad shel yasenu kezanav. Okay. Rav Chisda al haaretz, which are the last words of the second paragraph, the last words of a mezuzah, b'shita achreina, should be on the last line only. These words on a mezuzah should only say those 2 words, al haaretz. There shouldn't be anything else on that line. That's it. Okay. It says Rashi, ein b'shita achreina el shtei tevos halalu. The last line could only have those two words. Shita. Some say it means at the end of the line. Shita. Then it should be at the beginning of that line. So if you look in Rashi, that what does it mean? B'seif. So you have these two lines, line, and then al haaretz we almost indent, and then you start halfway in the middle, and then you write. Or it's the opposite, that you write two regular lines, and then al haaretz is continuing as normal on the, let's say, the third line, and it just ends in the middle. V'ikadi amrit betchilas shita. Okay, so mandi amrit b'seiv shita. Why should it be that? Let's see this again. B'shita achreina. Ikadi amrit b'seiv shita. V'ikadi amrit betchilas shita. So mandi amrit b'seiv shita. Why should it be that the words al haaretz should be at the end, skipping all these other words? Because the pasuk ki gavoya shemayim haaretz, that the shemayim is above the aretz. What does that mean? So Rashi says like this: Shiu shemayim haaretz. The mashma k'dichsiv ki gavoya shemayim haaretz kain yarchi mehem. So you'll have yiricha shamim, right? So if you the last words l'man yirbu yemechem v'mei b'nechem al ha'adama shenishbata Hashem avosechem kimei shemayim al haaretz. So the word shemayim and then aretz. So it's like the word shemayim is above the word aretz. So shemayim is the last word on that line, and then you flush it all the way down, and you have the word aretz right underneath the word shemayim. So indicating that the word shemayim is above the aretz. Actually, just like the shemayim and aretz are far apart, so too the word shemayim should be at the last word on one line, and then it continues al haaretz all the way at the other end. So, and therefore that is the machlokas. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's see. All right, we didn't finish question 5. TA 11. Okay, we didn't do that. Sirtut, we'll see that tomorrow. Adkan.